whole family actually came to California from Upper Michigan, and I was the first one born in California, and so all of my brothers, I had three brothers, they were born in Michigan, and that's still where aunts and uncles and that sort of thing are, like my, sort of progenitors, if you will, of that part of the family are, and my dad was a machine worker in Michigan, and during World War II, he had a certain skill with this particular machine. It was like a ball bearing machine, and he was one of very few people, I guess, who was deemed capable of working this particular machine, and so he was actually kept out of going to the war, like going to be a soldier to work this thing, which wasn't terribly technical, as I understand, but specialized, well, anyways, one day the machine blew apart and threw him across the room and broke ribs and that sort of thing, and pushed a rib up against his heart, and so that was when he was in his 20s, and so at that time then he had, related to that, then he had a heart attack because there was damage to his heart, so it was always kind of known to him and to my mother that I guess that he was sort of living on borrowed time after that, something would happen, so anyways, later then, the war's over and that sort of thing, everybody's back, everybody's working, and my father had been literally, like, not on disability, because I don't think there was any such thing at that time, but he was disabled for a couple of years and couldn't work. He was sort of bedridden for at least a year, and so then was hard to get into work, so he was in and out of some jobs, but basically it was a somewhat depressed area of the country and that sort of thing. Upper Michigan not being a very industrialized place anymore, certainly, and all of the industry was in really super heavy industry, like logging and that was really super hard on people. So looking for work then, he came out to be a machinist in the Bay Area. So one of my aunts and uncle, her husband, my mother's sister and her husband were out here, and they had heard about jobs that he could get with, one was with the U.S. Steel, and so he got a job as a machinist with U.S. Steel, and then with the jacuzzi company, actually, machining these parts and machines that would make up the jacuzzi water pumpers and stuff like that, so while being a machinist, he learned to be a draftsman, and then got a job being a draftsman. I think that's when he went to the steel company, actually. Yeah, it was as a draftsman, and worked on larger and larger projects, and then was finally hired as a draftsman by the University of California, Berkeley, for the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories up in the hills above UC Berkeley. So that's where he worked until he died in 1972. He was 56 years old then when he died, and I was 10. So at that time, then he kind of became a little bit of a manager there. He was a buyer, actually, for the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. At that time, they called them the Lawrence Radiation Labs. Now they call them the Lawrence Berkeley Labs. But yeah, radiation not such a positive word anymore. Yeah, it's kind of funny to have that on the sign. Yeah, but he helped to build things up there, like do the plans for things like the Bevatron up there, the Atom Smasher up on the hill,
wow,
and things like that. Not the driving force of any of those things, to be sure, but working as one of the people being the drafting part of, like, how blocks fit together to build the building and so forth. So others of my brothers too had kind of taken up drafting, and my oldest brother became an inspector, actually, for the city of San Leandro. So, like, kind of somebody who went over other people's plans, and that he was killed in an accident by a drunk driver, actually, some years ago but there was a little bit of that. There was a little bit of that kind of tradition of having these tools around. So I did inherit from my father. Well, even before he died, I inherited. He gave me like things like drafting tools and his compasses and things that would draw stuff like a circle and that, and of course I was really quite fascinated by those things, and by, you know, even just lined paper with the little squares, you know, because he had all this paper for drafting with the little squares on it, you know, to make these grids, and those sorts of things did, as a child, like fascinate me, and you know, and so I could, you know, I had the tools to draw a perfect circle and to do these things that, you know, that maybe other people wouldn't be influenced by it, but just with artistic things in general and design, like my mother then was always very encouraging. Even my brothers were never discouraging, but my oldest brothers like didn't understand so much what I was trying to do, and maybe even you know, later telling me that they thought, you know, or they didn't think that I would have anything in particular to do with it later on, you know, that like, how could you study this in college or something like that, you know, that you know, what would it lead to, you know, that you would be like desperate or destitute all your life because you didn't have any actual skill, you know. That was maybe a little bit of the thought, you know, and maybe part of that too was that I was the first person in my family to ever go to four-year university and graduate with that degree. You know, the others had like associate degrees from a community college or something like that, you know, and which isn't, you know, nothing negative about that, but they, you know, didn't see that, maybe as a lot of families actually who don't have so much of that history, they didn't see that as a great thing to do if you were going to go to a four-year university. You know, that's why so many like kind of somewhat underprivileged families, you know, want the first person who goes to college to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, because, you know, why the hell else would you go to college? You know, like, you know, to be an artist and a designer, like, what's a designer even? You know, we don't even know what that is. You know? So, but you know, they can latch on to, okay, nurse, doctor, you know, lawyer,
tangible.
Yeah, or of course engineer. You know, those sorts of things, which are, you know, these high value words, and I think now, of course, that's sort of changed for design. I mean, design is something that you know, might be talked about on national television, where it was when I was growing up, it wasn't a word that was out there, you know, at all. So maybe it's easier now for people to put it into a category, kind of sort of like that. Not quite, but but a little bit.